When we turned off the blacktop highway down the dirt road to PJ and Paul's, the woods on each side immediately enveloped us. The first thing I noticed was the density of the woods. The canopy was so thick that hardly any of this afternoon June sunlight was getting to the ground. Along the way, Mark pointed out the power line cutouts where Paul had spotted the tall, dark figures, and another open field where another figure had been seen. And then, just before entering their property, we stopped at a low water bridge, and Mark pointed down the creek to the spot where Paul had seen something in the water moving its arms back and forth, splashing water. When Mark and I hit the end of the road to turn onto their property, it didn't look like more than a two-track with barely any room for us to get through there without the branches scraping the side of the truck. "Wow, this place is really back in here," I said to Mark. "Yep," he replied. I was surprised at how much it opened up once we pulled up to their house. When we pulled up to the carport, I was immediately noticed the above-ground pool where PJ had her sighting, which was only about 20 yards behind us at the wood line. I immediately noticed the beauty and peacefulness of the place. What a wonderful setting. But then again, I didn't live here, so my perspective was quite different than PJ and Paul's. I couldn't wait out to get to see the lay of the land. But that would have to wait until the next day when Paul would take us on a tour on his side-by-side.
Well, I'm lucky enough to be down in a place in Arkansas where some activity has been reported and had eyewitness encounters. And that's PJ Arkansas's place and her husband Paul. And this is a place that's pretty special because a person that meant a lot to a lot of people started some research down here and had both PJ and Paul on his show, and that was Kerry Arnold. And I'm really honored to have the opportunity to come to a spot where he had been, and he had also experienced some activity. So I was lucky enough to have this opportunity only because a good friend of Kerry's, Bradley Hatcher, was unable to, make it because of some knee replacement surgery. So I owed kind of a shout out to Bradley, and we hope you get a quick recovery and join us next time we're down here, because we really think that you would want to be here, and we've talked about it already. So Bradley, a debt of gratitude to you for allowing me to kind of take your spot. And to Mark for reaching out to me and giving me this opportunity. I'm really kind of blessed. So this weekend, we're out here in this area where there's been activity. It's been documented before, and following kind of in the footsteps and legacy to kind of carry on what Kerry had started. So hopefully we'll have an opportunity to be in some of the same spots, talk to Pam and Paul, and get more lay of the land, see some, at least personally for me, to see some of the locations of where both of them have had their encounters. And we're not too far from a creek just right over here where our campsite's really close to, also where Paul's brother saw a very large figure walking down that creek. So this is kind of the environment that we'll be in. Forecast is for some rain, so maybe we'll get a chance to have hopefully some tracks, maybe, or some hopefully some evidence. So we'll see how things go.
I was immediately struck by the steepness of the terrain as we drove out of the campsite and up the ridge above it. It was very rocky terrain, but Paul maneuvered us through like a pro. How we didn't tip over is quite an accomplishment and a testament to his driving skills. He took us to the top of the ridge where we were able to get out and view a couple of interesting tree bows. It also gave us a good vantage point down the ridge to where their house was. Later, he took us up to the power line cutout, stopping along the way at a couple spots where PJ had heard growls and other vocalizations. Again, I was very surprised at the elevation at the top of these ridges and the cutout line. It was a great vantage point, and you can see down to the nearby river.
Okay, so we're down in Arkansas, Paul and PJ, and here on a ridge up above their place, which you can see through the trees when the leaves are off. Came across a spot here that kind of piqued our interest a little bit, where there was a bare spot up against this tree here. As we back out, we can see the rest of the floor of the forest. It's all leaves, but right for here seems to be kind of brushed away or cleared a bit. All this is all the dirt here from that area right there. So we're at the end of a finger of the ridge. Definitely a good observation point for looking here. And
size of a soccer ball or maybe a little bigger, and I can see a good 3 foot of it.
really,
and it just real black, solid. I mean, you ever seen black that's so black it's got a blue sheen to it?
Right.
That's what it was like.
So like March or April, probably.
honestly don't remember what month that would have been, but it was. I remember that day was kind of warm that day, and I just assumed it was sitting in the creek cooling off.
Gotcha.
Playing around because it was taking that arm and just splashing the water back and forth. But it was splashing. You could see it just shooting up about 3 foot out of the water, out of the creek, you know.
So you didn't think it was in the water? It wasn't on the bank doing it?
No, it was in the water. Yeah. Later we walked down there and there was a deep hole right there by a tree.
Oh.
And I guarantee you it was sitting in that hole there. That's why we couldn't see the body, because it was on the other side of that tree, and the creek kind of bends right there. Yeah. And so all we could see was just that arm out there, you know.
Interesting. You've seen black ones out here as well as brown ones?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
The one you saw on the power line was black.
Right. Yeah.
I've had several things happen to me while hunting. The first, I guess you could say, was I was sitting in my stand, and there was 3 dogs that I could hear them coming through the woods. They were barking, and they come up into this corner over here where the wood line and the fence line meet. And they went up in the corner, and I could see them up there just rolling around. And I thought, you know, maybe they had a deer down. So I got down from my stand, ran the dogs off, and I thought, well, I'm gonna go ahead and walk up in that corner, and you know, just to see if they had a deer down. And as I walked up there, I got it was just a real bad stench. I do distinctly remember like a urine smell, but there was more to it than just the urine. And I took a few more steps, and then across the fence, and then there's the power line, and in the woods over there, which is a big cedar thicket, something started growling. And it was the deepest growl I've ever heard. I can't even describe it. The growl felt like it surrounded me. So I just started backing out, and I knew not to turn my back. I knew not to run. And so I just started backing out, and I backed probably 100 yards, 7,500 yards till I hit the creek. And then I had to turn, and then I ran to the truck after that. But, and then, you know, I was sitting in my stand another time, and I heard mouth pops to the woods to my right. Or that's the best way I can describe it, is like the mouth, you know, mouth pop. And then just, it wasn't too long after that, I heard rock clacks to my left. And then right after that, I heard a loud, or it wasn't super loud, but it was a howl. And I would say it's probably about 100 yards behind me. And that's when I was texting Paul to tell him to come get me. But probably the most recent was I was in my stand waiting on Paul to come get me. He was on top of the power line, and he was going to come by and pick me up on the 4-wheeler. And it wasn't completely dark, but it was, you know, fairly dark. And beside my stand is a big cedar thicket, and then there's a creek. Well, then, you know, I heard this deep breath, like something taking a deep breath in. And I would say the breath was probably 3 to 4 seconds long, and then it let it back out. And it was probably 30, 40 feet away from me. I mean, I knew what was over there, because there's nothing here that can sound like that. And, you know, there's been, you know, multiple knocks, hearing thuds behind my stand. Oh, and yeah, and that one, I was hearing the thuds behind my stand one morning, and I heard a tree go over. And then a little bit later, another tree went over. So when I met Paul back at the house for lunch, I was telling him about it. So he came and sat with me that evening in the stand, and we wasn't sitting there 5 or 10 minutes. And it wasn't windy. It hadn't been storming or anything. And then across the power line, opposite of my stand in the woods over there, another tree. So, I mean, that's 3 trees in one day, which is not an uncommon thing around here. We hear a lot of trees go over. So.
And you said the first growl that you mentioned here kind of enveloped you. What time of day was that when that growl happened?
That was in the evening, probably, and it was during rifle season. I can't remember if the time change or not. But, you know, there was still plenty of daylight. It was, so I would say probably 5 or 6 in the evening before time change, you know. But, you know, it wasn't like real dark yet or anything, so.
So most of the activity has been in the evening behind your stand?
Yeah, it seems to be more active in the evening, except for that one morning when I was hunting and I heard the thuds and then the 2 trees, you know, go over. But it seems like most of the time when I hear things, it's usually in the evening.
And that hasn't deterred you, though, from coming back out, but made you a little bit more aware to hear and listen for that type of activity now?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I've changed things up, the way I do things. I used to come out here and hunt by myself. You know, Paul wouldn't even be here. I don't do that anymore. And I'm definitely more aware. You know, it's, I don't have the same peace as I used to. It's taken all that away, you know. The thing for me is like before, and you would hear a tree crack or leaves crunching, you never thought anything about it, you know. But now if you hear a tree crack or leaves, the first thing that pops into my head is, could it be one? You know, and that's how it changes a person that has seen one. You don't want to think every noise, everything is a Bigfoot, but your mind cannot help but go there. So that's how it's affected me. So, you know, I can't say that it didn't bother me, but because, you know, in the back of my mind, I would always wonder, what's doing this? Could it be possible? You know, and that's what goes through your mind. Could it be possible? But it never deterred me. I still hunted out here by myself. But, you know, but after seeing one, it has, I can't even explain for me what it's done. You know, it's taken something I don't think I'll ever be able to get back. I'm trying. But, you know, it's because now when I'm sitting there, if I hear a limb break, I don't think natural. First thing that pops in my head is, could that be one?
And Paul had also mentioned that the Trail of Tears kind of goes through your property or near to your property.
Mm-hmm.
And how has that kind of started to maybe shape or influence how you kind of think about these interactions you're having out here?
Well, you know, once I found that out, I wondered if that could be part of it, because it seems like the Native history and Sasquatch history kind of go side by side a lot.
And you've also had other types of what we might call paranormal activity in seeing lights or orbs, is that right?
Yes.
And have you had anything recently that's any other strange occurrences maybe that you can't explain, maybe sounds or different things that just are very curious that you don't really know what was making the sound or maybe what you were seeing and what type of experience was actually happening?
Well, I went outside. This was probably about 2 weeks ago, and I was just doing a little bit of filming, and I was talking into my phone, and I never seen it as I was doing this. I didn't catch it till that night, and I went back and looked at it, but there was a light in the woods. It was, during the day, but it was just a bright flash, but it lasted for a couple of seconds. But then once I slowed it down and zoomed in, you can see movement. You can see the light actually moving around. I mean, it's just stuff like that.
As I spoke to Pam and she recounted her many other experiences with the unknown on her property, it began to dawn on me that the history this land holds is way beyond what I'd come for. I was only here for a mere 48 hours. For her and Paul, this is home. Their lives are intertwined with all that has occurred here and are now part of its history.
And Mark last night had the idea to get the thermals going. And I suggested that we come out here to Pam's shoot house and use the thermal up and down the power cutouts, see if we see any activity, because they've described as they were driving on a dirt road here to the opposite, or to your right, my left, of seeing figures along this power line, and one's similar to this that line the road. So Mark and I came out about probably 1:30, 2 o'clock, getting it all geared up, getting the thermal, our gear, all ready to come on over here. We're about 200 yards from our camp. So just as we were leaving camp, we had packed our stuff, gotten the all clear for each other, ready to go, had tied up our loose ends, and we take one step to leave camp, and as soon as we take that step, we hear, I heard a whistle come from probably 40 yards from our camp across a small stream, and it wasn't a with two pursed lips type of whistles. It was a whistle through the teeth, kind of a low, like that. I interpret that as something trying to get my attention, call my attention. Could have been a bird. I tried to rationalize it as a bird later, but it definitely caught my attention. And immediately after that whistle, there was a tree knock up on a rise above our camp, not more than probably 40 or 50 yards away, in an area that Paul had taken us through on his side-by-side to give us a lay of the land. So that was very curious to start the night off. And hair stood up on the back of my neck and my arms when I heard that whistle knock. I estimate that I heard the whistle come from pretty much the exact spot. And there's a big cedar tree above us, and we just noticed that there was a interesting leaner here on this cedar tree, but this is not a cedar branch. So it could have come from anywhere, but it's very, very odd that it's balancing right here at this spot, and we just happened to notice it this time. So as we heard the whistle, we progressed into this field here on the other side of the creek, and that's kind of where I stopped and talked this direction to say, hey, we're just going for a night hike. You know, we don't mean any harm or issues to cause trouble. I just kind of did that and said a bit of a prayer going into the woods for Mark and I to be, protected and have a good good experience. And we did. The rest of the night was actually a pretty eventful, and that's one of the reasons that we've come here and to experience things like this. So Mark and I start walking through the field this direction, and I just went ahead and spoke out loud to whatever it was that was making that noise for my own, I guess, my own sake and security, to feel that I was communicating with something else, to let them know, or whatever was there, that I wasn't here for any other reason than to, you know, enjoy the time here with Pam and Paul and just take a night hike. We did have, you know, self-defense tools with us, but at no time did I ever think of that whatsoever or get to that level of fear. And this, as I mentioned before, was the area that we heard the whistle emanate from last night. And as we drove up today to look for some prints, we've seen a very big buck scrape about 10 feet away, and then this tree bow here also that is pretty secured into the ground, and there's no trees or anything that fell over the top of this, pinning this down. So this gives another view of right where Mark had parked his truck and where we started to move out into the field last night and move over to the shooting house. The creek comes down through here, is where Paul's brother saw a big, large, black figure. In fact, it's just right 10 feet away in that creek, because the deer stand is right over here where we just saw our camp. Paul's brother was sitting in the deer stand, or at the bottom of the deer stand, and that creek parallels and goes back past our camp also. So we're going to kind of go over here a little bit further and maybe try to find the exact location and maybe a print of where that, I feel that whistle was exactly came from. The rest of the walk over here was fine. We decided to get up into the shoot house and get the thermal set up with a phone app, so we could look at the thermal on the phone while aiming at the same time and not get too much night blindness. We took a good 15-minute thermal shot recording of the area up this power line cutout and didn't see anything at all. So I suggested that we go the opposite direction, which is another the same power line cutout with some different elevations and some more topography, with two large power poles. And as I shot that direction, Mark let me do the aiming and was in control of the app and the camera. And at the beginning, there really was no activity. Saw some heat signatures of rocks. This western facing gathered a lot of heat throughout the day. Each direction we saw, or we pointed the thermal, we would see heat signatures that were on trees or rocks. So we were pretty well acquainted with what would be considered, a valid heat signature of something living versus a tree or a rock. So as we shot, as I aimed this direction, nothing was happening for a good 10-15 minutes, and I started to notice some movement along the ground, and it wasn't a heat signature of red. It was a white heat signature. I'm just saying that because I'm not real familiar with all the terminology for thermal cameras, but it was white in color as it moved. To me, it seemed smaller in structure, in size. It seemed to be a round, at first kind of a round object behind grass, moving in and out of grass, maybe moving its head, peeking through grass, above grass. And I hit the recorder, started recording it on the thermal, and followed it for a good 5 to maybe 10 minutes. That's just an estimate. We haven't looked at the footage and seen the exact time. But it started to move in a what I interpret as maybe a motion of a butterfly or maybe a bird. But as it progressed and we followed it with the thermal, it seemed to take on a different type of characteristic and more of a jumping and darting movement, and less of a flapping or movement in that direction. And really, I haven't taken a good close look at it on a bigger screen other than a phone, so this is all subject to change as I take a closer blow-up look at it. But this is just my first impressions of what I saw. And I had never seen anything like that on a thermal camera, or any movement like that on a thermal. With my naked eye looking at the area that we were filming with the thermal, I didn't see any lights or movement. The moon had already gone behind the ridge and was blocked, so there was no moonlight at all, and it was very, very dark, and everything that I saw was really that image on the thermal. Continued to film it, and one of the first thoughts that kind of came to my mind was for whatever it may be. I don't know if it was just something randomly that Paul had been talking about earlier in the day that kind of came back to me about the Trail of Tears, but I kind of got the feeling that whatever this was responsible for kind of moving around this heat signature or this light or whatever it wasn't visible to my naked eye. I kind of got a Trail of Tears type of feeling, or a spiritual, elemental, maybe spirits of the forest type feeling to it. That's the only explanation that I kind of popped into my head, and I don't have any real explanation for why that pops in my head other than conversations earlier in the day. But I just got the feeling that this wasn't. It was a bit paranormal. It wasn't anything that was really physical. But that's what we were seeing, and we were tracking it as it moved toward Pam's stand. I thought it was probably 250 to 300 yards away, and as we've come here today and I've gotten to look at the area in daylight, I went up to the stand and noticed that what I thought would have given me an elevation to see past a rise in front of me actually was an optical illusion from what I was seeing in the thermal last night. And in fact, it was much closer, probably 75 to 100 yards away from me. Now we're in parallel with where we were describing the heat signature that we saw dancing around and moving around that we couldn't explain. So this trail right here goes right up to the power line, and you can see through here just barely that the power line posts are there. So this area is parallel with where our camp is, and this is where we saw the anomalous entity heat signature, I guess we'll call it, the unknown. So this is much closer than I thought at night. I thought we were much further distance away from our camp, and where this heat signature showed up was much closer to this trail and not as far down that direction. So really gives us some things to think about and some new avenues to pursue as far as along this parallel position here in the power lines. It got to a certain point to where both Mark and I were watching it on the camera, on the thermal, on the app on the phone. And about that time, we heard movement behind us in the wood line, probably 20 yards maybe, and both of us looked at each other and knew that that was something that was unusual. It sounded large in the sense of it wasn't a stabbing motion, it was more of a sweeping motion through the woods or trail. So we decided to stop filming what we were seeing in front of us with the heat signature, and decided to turn the camera back to our original direction to see if we might catch something coming out of the wood line. We made a lot of noise doing that. That's made out of corrugated tin, and there's 2 chairs in there on plywood that when you roll or move around, you make some noise, and there's not a lot of room in there for both Mark and I to be in there with equipment and 2 chairs. So we weren't quiet, but we did get the camera turned in the direction that we were hoping that something would be coming out of the wood line. We didn't hear anything else behind us. And one thing I need to back up about, when we first got here, and climbed up into the stand, we did hear one wood knock directly behind us. So it wasn't like we were surprised to hear something behind us, other than the size and the timing between when we hear the wood knock and an hour and a half later hear something behind us after we're watching whatever it is we caught on thermal camera. So we did get turned in this direction and aim the camera up the power line again, and a heat signature started to come out of the wood line. And I wasn't able to directly look at the phone. I was holding the phone for Mark and enabling him to aim and get a bead on whatever it was coming out of the wood line. And for my angle, which wasn't a great angle, to the side, I saw what looked to be a elongated figure, but the steepness of the incline of this power line, I think now looking back on it, made something that was on 4 legs look like it was on 2 legs, and an elongated figure, and it was really having maybe hind legs or front legs up the incline. So what we followed for maybe 3 or 4 minutes, moving around, turned out to be a deer. And Mark noticed that before me when he saw it turn and he could see the neck, and I noticed it when it turned sideways and jumped over some part of the bush or undergrowth over there and then bedded down. So we heard something behind us, but something that was much further away from us, probably a good 200 yards away from us, was a deer. But what was behind us was much larger than what would be making noise that would be a deer.
After Mark and Scott left, Paul had left. I was here by myself, and I was walking, and I mean, things just started going crazy. I heard a knock that came from behind Paul's shop out. It was towards the spring where we have a spring. And then it wasn't, but a few seconds later, I heard another knock come from where Mark and Scott had been camping. And then a little bit after that, there was another knock. I was texting Mark and, telling him, what was going on. But needless to say, I cut my walk short because things were just getting too crazy. I didn't feel comfortable. But, also it was a pleasure meeting Scott. Paul and me and Mark and Bradley all discussed this and thought that Scott would be a good fit, to come out here. And I trust Mark. And Scott was an amazing guy, very intelligent, really good at speaking. So I think he's going to be a really good asset, to this team. And, we're really looking forward to when Bradley and Mark and Scott can come out here all together and work as a team, all three of them. And I'm very thankful for these guys. They're good friends. So, I have my own little channel. It's PJ Arkansas Sasquatch Giants of the Woods. If y'all want to kind of hop on over there from time to time and kind of see what's going on, I just, kind of do updates on activity. What we do here with, Mark and Scott and Bradley, it's very important. It just kind of gives people a little bit of a glimpse of what it's like to live with the Giants of the Woods.
This has been a Sawdust production.